Andrew, SBJ came out with its most influential list this week. That's topic one.
And the big get is JJ Redick, of course, from Duke. And he got to say some things to you, a Maryland grad.
Are we allowed to say the F word on this? And I'm sorry, John.
And we're back. The Marchand and Ourand Sports Media Podcast. I'm Andrew Marchand, sports media columnist for the New York Post. He's John Ourand.
Our good buddy there, John Ourand, is
the media reporter for the Sports Business Journal. Today, the big get, JJ Redick. We'll have that for you in a little bit. JJ was excellent, as you'd expect. So that's coming up in a minute. But then we're going to just hit the topics as we go here, getting close to Christmas and the New Year and Hanukkah. So happy holidays to everybody listening.
All right, let's get straight to it. Who's up? Who's down?
Who's up? Who's down?
John, my who's up is First Take. Stephen A. Smith and his debating partners have seen their ratings go up 16% from last year, which really has validated Smith's move to expel Max Kellerman as his debate partner. Chris Russo has been a big hit on Wednesdays, and the show has a lot of energy. It's averaging about 430,000 viewers per day. That's a big number in the morning. So my who's up, First Take.
Andrew, ESPN's studio shows are going to sweep the who's up this week because I'm giving it to Eric Reinholm and Aaron Solomon, who are the brains behind Around the Horn. Why Around the Horn? It celebrated its 20th anniversary this week and 20 years of that studio show, and the amount of reporters that got their start on it and that have now gone on to bigger and better things is legion. I mean, check out these roster names: J.A. Adonde, Kevin Blackistone, Frank Isola, a Terp in there as well, Jackie McMullen. It's a lot of names that's out there. Bob Ryan, Sarah Spain, so it's old school, new reporters that get out there. And, we had Mina Kimes on as our big get just a couple of weeks ago, and she referenced just the amount of hits that she got on that. And she credited that show really with helping her career to blossom the way that it has.
I'd say more sports writers, though. They got a little away from sports writers. I think that's really where the secret sauce for the whole thing has been for those 2 decades. All right, who's down? Just out of tradition, I'm going Fox Sports as World Cup coverage.
Again.
You might not have heard. I don't really like their coverage. I'm not really going to go into more detail about it. I just want it to improve. They got the Euros. They have the Women's World Cup. They got the World Cup in 26 in the United States. The focus needs to be a little bit more on the hardcore fan a little bit. And I know they're going to tell me that you're nodding your head. Come back at me.
You had a great column that I totally disagreed with in New York Post Plus. I think Strong is a strong announcer. I like having an American voice. I don't like having the British voice. I'm a hardcore sports fan. I'm a casual soccer fan, and they need something to win me over. What you said in the column is that whoever the announcers are going to be has to live and breathe soccer. Well, I don't think did Joe Buck live and breathe football or baseball? I think you can live and breathe different things.
No, you can do both. Hold on a second. No, first off, let me just clarify. You love John Strong so much. You only said Strong. You didn't even say John. But anyways, John, you're such a huge fan. John Strong is good enough to do games. He doesn't strike me as a number one for the World Cup. He does have the passion, but what I said in my newsletter on Mondays is that, I think that next generation, if there's anybody among those Ryan Ruccos and Noah Eagles and Adam Amines and Benettis and et cetera, Joe Davis, is anybody loves soccer, and maybe they could be that, what Fox wanted Gus Johnson to be. And John Strong he does a good job. Ian Dark, their number 2, is better. I mean, if you listen, it sounds better. And I get it. You're going to say that there's an English bias, that it just sounds bigger. I mean, maybe I'm not going to tell you that's totally wrong, but I don't think that's the bias. I think the bias is just how they do the games, and just kind of their knowledge of the game and just hitting the right points, and then just the overall calls. And I think I'm being fair when I say that. Again, Strong is good enough to do the game, do World Cup games. I don't think he's really. I think they could do better at number one.
By the way, I'm not disagreeing with your overall point. I'm not defending Fox's coverage of the World Cup. I like seeing an American voice calling American soccer. I just like it. It's I don't know. I'll raise my flag on that. I don't want to hear the Brits come over here and tell me
they're the best. If they're the best.
By the way, I want it to be called a goaltender too, for that matter. It doesn't need to be
exactly.
called.
You don't know anything about. I listen. I can't.
You're a hardcore fan. That grates on you,
you,
but you're going to watch no matter what, Andrew.
No, but this is what's wrong. Okay, I can't stress this enough. The reason that NBC and the Premier League has gotten credit, the reason CBS with Champions League has gotten credit, the reason ESPN got credit back when they had the World Cup and the Euros, is because they're appealing to the fan who cares about the coverage. Because you're the fan who doesn't really care about the coverage. You say you care about it, you don't really care about it. You're watching because it's the World Cup, and you'll tune back in 4 years. And the idea that you want the best broadcaster, whatever that means, and that's where, again, I'm not saying you have to just go and just talk soccer lingo so people can't understand it. You need to make it digestible for other people. It's just that the person who cares about it is going to be the one who's going to be the influencers to tell other people, no, this coverage is good. And instead, when you try to appeal to the people who don't care as much, all you do is those people don't really care that much, because John, you don't really care that much about the coverage. And then the people who actually do care about the coverage, you really turn them off. And I don't think you talk about, I don't really care about growing the game. It doesn't really matter to me personally, someone who loves soccer. I'm going to like the World Cup in 4 years. If someone says, oh, now it's the third biggest sport in America, who cares? I don't care about that. What I do care about is what I'm watching, and do they lift it up? And this, I think, shows, like, when broadcasters, that they do have an impact in terms of how good it is, because there are things that have been lost in this World Cup. It's been a tremendous World Cup on the field, off the field, another story, but just do better. Okay. We don't have to, we've talked enough about it, and it's not personal. I know people love to say that when you criticize something. I try not to focus on one thing. This happens to be the biggest event in the world right now. And it's been disappointing in terms of the coverage.
I love the coverage so much. I turned off the Netherlands game when they were down 2-0. I know I should say 2-0.
Exactly.
I know I should say it.
You don't care.
All right. My who's down is John Stainer, who is the managing director for the Americas of Nielsen Sports. And that's because it has been a tough year for Nielsen Sports. That they're trying to count the number of viewers that are watching sporting events. So this year, one of the reasons ratings are up almost across the board is because they're adding in almost real time out of home viewing. So, it's viewing from restaurants and bars, viewing from other people's homes, viewing in an airport or something along those lines. And so there's this, they got a whole big jump in that number, which means presumably that the advertisers will have to pay more, because look, this many more people are seeing it. Well, I had a story in SBJ Media. Austin Karp reported it out. The NFL and Nielsen conducted a survey around Thanksgiving, and they undercounted the NFL's Thanksgiving numbers by 37%. You have Amazon. I mean, Amazon's releases that come out every Friday make me laugh, because they say, oh, the Nielsen's number is this. But our internal number that has no sort of verified metrics is always considerably higher than the Nielsen number. We're at a crossroads right now for Nielsen and for third-party measurement of these of sports, and it's important on a business case, because this determines how much advertisers pay, how much support all these networks get, and by contrast, how much they pay the leagues and how much the teams get, and everything that everybody sees. So it's my who's down, and it's something that bears watching.
One other note, I do like Tim Buckman, Amazon's, who's I think they're head of Thursday Night Football. I don't know his exact title over there, but he writes those up, and he always uses like words like an astonishing comeback, and I love like his adjectives are just classic Buckman. I just got to point that out.
Buckman's releases are they're fantastic reading because they start with like the demo number, and then they go into the Amazon number, and then tucked down in the bottom is this teeny little Nielsen number that's the only one that everybody uses.
I know Tim could sell ice cubes to Eskimos. So it's good stuff. That's good stuff. Like the Rays have been good. All right, that brings us to our first topic: the most influential people in all of sports from the Sports Business Journal. I'm going to have my power rankings coming out this upcoming Monday in my newsletter. So check that out at NewYorkPost.com.
We're going to get a preview today of that or no?
I'm not giving it up. They'll be we'll do it end of the year. We'll go into end of the year, which we'll do next week, our end of the year review. But your most influential for Sports Business Journal, Aid Madcore, the man in charge of the Sports Business Journal, in his editorial, he said the reason there's so many media people is because you have such an influential sports media writer in John Ourand. Is that true? Are you that influential?
It's all due to this podcast, Andrew. Absolutely.
All right. Well, that is nice. That's good to hear from the balls. You should bring that up, clip that, and when they talk about raises and stuff, bring that up. So Abe, you owe John more money. That's what I took out of that.
Well, considering all the grief that I get from from this list, I should have a more influence on it.
All right, I'm gonna make this clear. My power rankings haven't gone up yet, but it's gonna be in there. If you complain about my power ranking, it's on the record. So you can call. It's just on the record. I'm putting on the recorder, and I'm going to publish it.
That's great.
I'm going to publish what you say, your complaints. Hopefully you're nice and pithy and you talk about other people, and it'll be great, and we'll publish them. And so they're going to come out. They're not influenced by anybody. I don't care what you think. They're sort, they think this is none of that. I'm going to rank them for 2022. So I'll look for that on Monday. All right, let's go into yours though, John. Number 1, Amazon. Marie Donahue and Jay Marine, the two people atop Amazon. Why?
One of the things about this pod, Andrew, is the idea that I'm a supporter of Amazon right now in terms of being most influential. You couldn't have predicted this 12 months ago. And that's because as we were going into this season, if you get the clips, how many times have I said the worst package available at the NFL? And it is. Of all the packages with the NFL, it has the smallest audience by far. The Thursday Night Football package is a package that not one broadcaster wanted, so they all passed on it. Amazon was sort of bidding against itself to keep this package. And what they did with this package, it's made the NBA, it's made MLB, it's made every single rights holder a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot more likely, a lot more comfortable about doing deals with Amazon for a number of reasons. First of all, I don't care about the viewership figures, except for the first couple of games when even Nielsen was saying they were getting 13, 14 million viewers for those games. So Amazon proved that they can handle a broadcast quality style number of viewers to a stream, and that's significant. NBC is providing all of the production. It's coming. Fred Godelli and is sort of overseeing everything, but Amazon is paying for it. And Amazon's production, they treat each Thursday night game almost like a Super Bowl. They have so many cameras. It's visually beautiful for these plainly awful games, for these games that I have little interest in.
They've had some good ones. Al Michael sometimes thinks they're not so good.
It's less about like how they're doing and more if you go inside the NFL, if you go inside Major League Baseball, look at the Pac-12. I mean, before Thursday Night Football, you had Formula One that passed on Amazon. You had the Big Ten that passed on Amazon because there was this big fear of we just want distribution and we don't know what they're capable of doing, even though Amazon paid or bid more than established traditional broadcasters in both those cases. Now, moving forward, I'm not sure if that's the case anymore.
Number 1, all these leagues, the number one thing they like about Amazon is their money. So
Absolutely.
let's be clear.
Yep.
Although they did bid higher for the Big Ten and some others, so we're going to test that theory. Look, I've been more bullish on Amazon throughout this podcast, throughout the year. And so, are they the most influential? I'm not sure. Like, here's the thing for my list I'm doing. I'm just focusing on 2022 because, what I'll explain there is that if you just focus on who the most powerful, it's always going to be Adam Silver, Roger Goodell, etc. And they might not even make my list just because they, this year, I mean, Goodell, obviously, they had the NFL deals, but, roll lap if you're listening, you might make the list.
He's listening. He
he's
is listening.
Yeah, he'll listen now. If he makes that list, I'll knock him down because he does it now. I'll keep it fair. But bottom line is, yes, they've made an impact.
So let me also just say one more thing. They're a disruptor in the business. That's sort of the buzz term now, but they're at like a $3 trillion disruptor. I mean, that's a pretty big disruptor to be. Other networks that I really liked on that list was Fox Sports. I think that what Fox did is this year, from starting a spring league to their situation with the Big Ten, where they handled the rights and negotiated with other networks about like where to put those rights, and they ended up with the best deal out of those rights. I know you're not big on their World Cup coverage. What I'm big on is their World Cup audience. And what I'm big on are the World Cup ad sales during, a really soft time for ad sales. The World Cup has been a huge home run for Fox from a business standpoint. And I think you just look to Thanksgiving weekend alone. I mean, they were able to handle football, NFL championship style audiences for Thursday in the NFL, for Friday with the World Cup, for Saturday with college football, and then Sunday again with the NFL. I just thought that they had a really, really good year.
But give me your other quickly, and we'll move to the next topic. 2 or 3 who you thought, who could have been besides Fox. Anybody else?
I always think that Jimmy Pitaro and ESPN, given what they've been doing with their streaming service and giving the fact that they're involved with so many different aspects of the media business, they're always somebody that's up there. And then also on the list we had CBS, Sean McManus, David Burleson. We had NBC, Pete Bavacqua, along with Molly Solomon.
You kissed everyone's butt. You want to get?
Well, I will say this about NBC. Molly Solomon, I mean, they had to do 2 Olympics from awful time zones and having a pandemic on top of it, and the numbers weren't great, but they got through it, and that's worth something.
I've been hesitant to do power. Mine are different. Yours are most influential. I guess power rankings are kind of similar, but I've been hesitant because people just draw conclusions about sources and all this other BS, and they're pain. But just give me a little behind the scenes for John Ourand's life. When these come out, all right, you don't have a rule like I do. They're on the record. I'm not kidding.
By the way, I am adopting that rule because I love that rule. Rule is great.
I'm not listening to all you. I'm going to do it. I know everyone takes these very seriously, and I get it. And I take them seriously when I do them. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to put a lot of effort and think about it, but I'm not going to play favorites. I'm going to think about it. And whoever I think's higher on a list, they'll be higher on. I'll be able to explain it. It's subjective. All right, let's move on. We're gonna get to JJ Redick, who's excellent. You're gonna want to stay on for that. Really good stuff about new media, old media, how he started his podcast as a player and where things are going in the business. Also some Stephen A and Chris Russo talking there. Let's just go to Apple. Okay, two subjects there. Where we stand with Sunday Ticket. And then also now MLS doing their deal with Fox, no ESPN. That's official. We reported that last week here on the podcast. Now that's official. Let's just first talk about, I had something in my newsletter on Monday. It's just kind of, I was told this, talked to some people, and, I don't think it was like so earth shattering new, but want to get your take. Like, what are we doing here with Sunday Ticket and Apple? What I was told is Originally, they wanted to just put it on Apple TV Plus and you'd get Sunday Ticket. And the NFL obviously said no to that. And then they want to make it at a lower price than what it's $300 on DirecTV. And then you've mentioned this previously that they want to protect CBS and Fox because if it's too cheap, then people just go through there and it's on Apple and then Fox and CBS would not be protected. I still was told that the people I talk to still kind of feel like it's going to be Apple, but not done. 75% in that range is what I've heard. That they think Apple will do a deal with the NFL, but definitely not a short thing. I mean, I don't really know how that's going to play out, to be honest. What's your take?
Yeah, by the way, 75%, it's been at 75% for months now.
Remember we did that with Al Michaels? That was one of our fun things. Was Al Michaels down to 20.
But Al Michaels was closer. This has been, two.
Hold on. Is Apple waiting for NBC or Fox or another job to open up like Al was?
Well, there is movement out there. Google has been kicking.
You buy the Google thing?
I think that I would put that as a long shot, Google.
So what do you buy then? I mean, again, I get it. I think will you agree? Because I think this is what we like to. At least we both do. I don't want to speak for you because you like doing that, and I don't like when you do that. You're like we both. So you can disagree.
Every time I speak for you, I never actually get it right. I think. Right?
I don't really like when you do that. No, I don't like when. So I'm not going to do it. But this actually, I think I can. We like to talk about things we know, right? To me, you write what you know, right? Obviously, you have opinions, so you have to be able to back those up. There's a little different, but you always report what you know. Don't go outside of that sphere because that's when you get into trouble. So, to be honest, I don't know what's going to happen here. So I just want to be clear on that. But what do you see? Do you you said Google's a long shot. We think Apple. Here's for a long time.
Here's what we know.
Yeah.
We know how Apple did its deal with MLS, and that deal, I think you had the initial report on that months ahead of time, and it was just hard. Apple is immovable in its stance, and we saw how MLS kept having to bend to Apple's will in terms of that. One of the reasons that the TV deal that they did with Fox took as long as it took is because Fox and ESPN wanted some exclusive content. They were like, we don't want to market, Apple out there. And Apple, I'm sure they had lots of long talks with Apple. Apple, no chance is Apple going to give that up. So we know that Apple is used to telling its partners to jump and watching them jump.
Yep.
This is also what we know. We know that the NFL is used to telling its partners in Fox, ESPN, and CBS to jump and watching them jump.
Yep.
And so what happens when you get those two companies that aren't used to sort of bending to the other's will, trying to get that 25%?
Yeah, they're both arrogant. They're both arrogant.
That's your words, not mine, Andrew. Don't say that for me, please.
It's the truth, though. They're both arrogant.
I have a lot of mouths to feed at the NFL. Please.
they're both arrogant. That's the word. Look, they should be. They got the product. They got the greatest.
They do,
product
absolutely.
in the world. In sports, they got NFL is the greatest product. In devices, Apple has more than one of the greatest products. So
I think we said this 7 months ago.
We'd be arrogant too if our podcast was the greatest podcast.
7 months ago, we said, boy, this is taking so long. I'm starting to wonder if something's up, and it's still the same thing. The longer this takes, the less likely I see one of them go.
An alternative.
Look, at the right price, Disney is still out there. They haven't actually pulled their bid, although we don't know what their bid is.
I think Disney is very unlikely.
I think it's very unlikely too. At the right price, Amazon is still out there, and already has an established relationship with the NFL that they love. I think
over 11,000 people. They're going to do another big NFL deal.
We'll see. I don't know.
Influential place though, so we'll see. Go ahead.
Google is out there as a possibility. Who knows? But there are some out there that would be willing to possibly kick the tires on this.
Really kicking tires? I mean, this is $1 billion deal.
I don't know.
It's weird. It's weird.
Here's the other problem that I'm going to give away a story that I'm working on probably, but the DirecTV has had this since 1994, right? That's how many years? That's like 27 years, right?
Okay, sure.
Just about almost 30 years. They have so many learnings about how to do this, which include blackouts. So like they just kind of know how to do.
Oh yeah, Apple's not into blackouts.
Well, also these streaming services, they don't they don't know how to do black. Like if you find out on Friday that you need to block out this game in Boise, Idaho, DirecTV has that all set up to do. Whoever ends up getting this in a digital capacity, I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm just saying that it's going to be something difficult. They're going to need to get this done earlier. They need to get it done to such an extent that they can start to market it. I mean, what they're going to get it done a month before the season, like for $2 billion. You got to give me a ramp up to try to get subscribers for it, right?
100%. All right. Well, we'll be watching that we're going to have a year in review next week, and then we're going to look ahead.
Andrew, I'm anxious to get to our big get, the JJ Redick. But before we do that, NFL Network announced their announcer pairings for the 3 network games that they're going to have coming up. And you noticed something on it.
Yeah, Noah Eagle, young guy, another big shot for him and Nate Burleson, first on Nickelodeon. Then he did a Fox game. He seems to be going in right direction in terms of his career. Iron Eagle's son did Fox's like 3rd or 4th game on college, as Clippers play-by-player. That was noticeable that he's got another NFL game from NFL Network. That was one. And
then real quick, a story that you broke in New York Post Sports Plus. It's almost as bad as Warner Brothers Discovery Sports. But Maria Taylor at NBC is going to be doing some college football.
Yeah, she's going to be doing the Big Ten pre, and I presume maybe post game. Might not have a post game; it'll be late, but she's going to be the studio host. So double duty for Maria Taylor after the move to ESPN. She's kind of one of their marquee voices and faces of that network now. So she'll be that first person you hear when the Big Ten moves their prime time games to NBC/Peacock next year. So Maria Taylor getting back, that's where she kind of made her name with College Game Day, etc., and on the sideline with ESPN.
Not a surprise. She was very good at ESPN on college. Good for Maria Taylor.
John, let's bring in the big get, JJ Redick. And John, JJ has a media empire, just retired and already has a media empire. He started as a player. We'll get into that in a moment. He's expanded his role on ESPN, doing 20 to 25 games this year. Does Get Up, First Take, SportsCenter, all that. On Christmas, he'll do the Sixers versus the Knicks with Ryan Rucco on play-by-play, Cassie Hubbarth on the sideline, noon game on Christmas. Co-founded his own media company, 342 Production, and then, of course, the podcast, Old Man and the Three. All right, that's enough. We did it all. JJ, thanks for joining us.
We're out of time, Andrew.
How long have you been retired?
Actually, when I retired, I thought that it was going to be a slow pace for a little bit of time, and I feel like I'm busier than I was as a player right now. There's just a lot on my plate between ESPN and my obligations to the podcast, my obligations to our company. It's been awesome though. I've really enjoyed it. It's just not the exact transition that I thought was going to happen.
One thing, JJ, that Andrew and I have certainly found out is that anybody can do a podcast, pretty much. You started yours while you were a player. Take us through, why did you start one? Has that been something that you thought about for a while before doing it?
Yeah, it wasn't something that I thought about before doing it. Woj, who was at Yahoo at the time, was starting the vertical platform. He had asked me to write some stuff. I wasn't a fan of that. It brought me back to college and having the anxiety of writing a term paper. So, and I also said to him, I said, this is very similar to the Players Tribune. Think of something else. And came back a couple months later. It's like, let's do a podcast. You can have your own. And I did not listen to podcasts. I didn't really know what a podcast was. I think I'd been on Bill Simmons in like 2010. So I did some research and initially I think what got me listeners was just the novelty of it, of an active player. I was the first NBA player to have his own active NBA player to have his own podcast. So there was a novelty in that. I'm interviewing my friends. I'm interviewing coaches. I'm interviewing other athletes. And now that format, has grown, and there's a bunch of podcasts and a bunch of athletes that have those type of podcasts. As time went on, my natural curiosity that I have, if I go to a dinner party, it's very similar to my podcast. And I've had people say that to me. Now I know what it's like to be on your podcast. I just like asking questions. But as time went on, I realized there's a sort of a gap in the marketplace, and for humanizing athletes and sort of allowing them to appear as someone other than a superhero. And while we hit on a bunch of topics on all my podcasts, I think that's the layer that I'm most proud of.
You know what I find really cool about your podcast is that as an NBA fan, you sort of bring me behind the curtain a little bit. I mean, you're recently retired. As you said, you're talking to your friends pretty much, and there's a certain level of conversation that is really cool to pick up on. Have you thought about being retired for 10 years and having that be a little bit more difficult? Like, how do you see this evolving?
It's a great question. It's something that I actually spend a lot of time thinking about. And how I think about it is I'm watching and listening to ESPN, to Fox, to Bleacher Report, to other podcasts. I'm seeing how they're talking about things, how they're asking questions. I think about my own relationships. I know at some point those relationships will phase out. And this is where I think ESPN has been so valuable for me, for guys that I didn't play with, even peers, guys I competed against for years that I didn't have a relationship with. They've seen me on ESPN. They trust me. They know how I operate. So I think by being sort of in both worlds, it actually helps the podcast. Look, I don't have a crystal ball on how the podcast will evolve. I just know it will evolve. It has evolved already in 3 to 4 iterations of this thing since 2016. And if there's one thing that I try to be, it's try to be adaptable. I don't want to be fixed and be stuck to a format. One of the things that we did initially, even going back to 2016 all the way through fall of 2021, is we had a bunch of different guests on. We would have the former director of the CIA. We had actors on. We had politicians on. What we realized is our core audience is NBA fans. They're NBA fans. Let's give them that content. So that's one natural evolution of the show. We are 95 to 99% NBA content right now, whereas the first iteration of it, we kind of jumped all over the map.
Yeah, that's what we kind of not, we're not the old man, the three, but we want media focused, right? So that's what we try to be. So when people come every week, that they know what they're getting. And you've talked about this, and this kind of been, Draymond's talked about this, Draymond Green, old media versus new media. All right. I have my opinions on this. What do you mean by that when you say old media versus new media?
I want to be very clear on this. I never said new media. Draymond.
Okay. All right. Okay.
You had him on a live.
You believe in it then. So I don't want to, I'll move on to the next question. If you don't, I don't want to pin you down on old media versus new media.
On the next
think
question.
that's a thing or not?
I think Draymond summarized it well, and he did it on his podcast first. But when we had him on our live show about a week after they won the NBA Finals in June, that was one of the first questions I asked him. I asked him about new media and what that means. And in a roundabout way, it's the way that we talk about basketball. It's the way that we talk about athletes. It's the way that we analyze things in a very different way. I was watching on Disney Plus the other day, Jon Stewart and Bob Iger talking about the news and the evolution of the news, where news used to be you state the facts and you go to the next story. And maybe you hyperbolize, and maybe something that is particularly newsworthy you spend more time on. You think about where I work now. At ESPN, when I was growing up, SportsCenter would run from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m., and then they'd fill the rest of the time with strongman iron competitions. So the media has evolved. Now there's debate shows. Everybody has to sort of think about things in a different way. And we grew up in this era of these shows, and meaning as athletes, we lived through it as athletes, and we haven't had strong representation on those shows, in those formats. And that's where I think guys like CJ McCollum or Patrick Beverly or Draymond, myself, Marcus Spears, Perk, like we're all part of this new wave of athlete-driven media. And that's not to say we could ever replace or even be better than old media. To me, it's not one has to win, one has to lose. To me, is how do we figure out a combination of both that makes the sports fan engage in a very positive way.
Now, I've been told that you like doing the games maybe more than doing the studio stuff. But the studio stuff has really gained some steam, especially when you're on with Stephen A., when you're on with Chris Russo. How have you found that? The kind of, you could say they're old media. They're look, I think that, to me, the concept, just before I ask you that question, it's really more direct to consumer media. That really is what we're talking about, is players have their own voice. They don't need to go through a reporter like me. I covered the Yankees for a lot of years. So if you did a story, you're going to, even if I'm telling your side of it and humanizing you, it's still through my lens. Now you can kind of reach the audience. But let me just get to the first take part of it. That old media, that kind of, what are you trying to do there when you're kind of going head to head with those guys?
I want to clarify. I love doing games, and I got to do a few at the end of last season, 2 regular season games, 3 playoff games, and I had signed a short contract. So I was up this summer, and it was a point of emphasis for me to be able to get games. And because I got a significant amount of games, 25 minimum games, there were things that had to be cut out, and so it was like a non-starter for me. Like, First Take needs to be in the contract. Like, I need to be doing First Takes. Give me this amount of appearances on First Take. I absolutely love doing First Take. I look at like the podcast, First Take, and games. Like, for me, those are the 3 things. And I think it's interesting because I think Stephen A. and I's relationship, we have a great relationship off camera, but even on camera, it has really evolved, and there's a lot of chemistry there. And there's also we both have great memories, so we like to call each other out on things. And with Mad Dog, I respect him, and we have had numerous conversations off camera. I would consider him a friend, but he comes from a certain era of shock jock sports takes, and I like to combat that. I'd like to point out where I think he's crazy.
Yeah, and so it's live TV. So this isn't hard. This is probably why you like it, I would presume. I mean, it's not playing, but it's live TV. So when you say something, it's coming out. Sometimes maybe you hadn't even thought about it. I mean, the Bob Cousy thing got a life of its own, where you said that he played against firemen and plumbers. When you said that, and then after, how'd you feel about how that all went down?
Some of First Take is meant to entertain. And so people are like, I disrespected the older gen. I knew it was going to, first of all, the segment was on Kyrie flipping off the Boston Celtics fans. Like, the segment had nothing to do with
this. Is the genius of Chris Russo, though. That's where Russo gets you. I wrote today, he baffles you with this stuff.
And then I brought up the fact that he was saying crazy stuff about Chris Paul from an earlier segment that I wasn't on. And he randomly, Stephen A. is like, Chris Paul's a top 5 point guard ever, and Bob and Chris said Bob Cousy is the greatest point guard ever, which I've actually seen him on First Take list his top 5 point guards as part of Mad Dog's A list, and he doesn't list Bob, so whatever.
This is the genius. This is the genius of Chris Russo.
Exactly. Part of the show is to entertain, yep. And so if I just said you can't compare a modern point guard or a modern player with a player in the 50s, because modern players play year round. They have skills coaches. There's player development coaches on every staff. They work on their game numerous times. They have all the recovery apparatuses. They are fully invested all the time, 100% in being great. And you compare that to the 1950s, when many players in the offseason had jobs. They had second jobs. I'm very grateful for everything those players did to lay the foundation for what is the modern NBA. That's not particularly entertaining. You know what is entertaining? Saying that he played against plumbers and firemen, which is not untrue. I don't mean it to be disrespectful. And that whole segment, there was so much more context to that conversation, but we know that it's the little small clips and the little small sound bites, which I'm totally fine with. that's ultimately what goes viral.
So JJ, you're now on First Take. You know that there's a big entertainment focus to it. When you were a player, how would you view these types of shows?
Didn't know they existed. I swear to God, not know that I knew who Stephen A was. I knew who Skip was. First Take was not a show that I watched. I looked at NBA.com for advanced stats. I looked at film when I was playing. I looked at Hoop Site. I didn't pay attention to other narratives around players. You probably hear enough because you're on Twitter where you know the argument LeBron versus MJ. Like I knew that existed. When they told me I was going to do First Take, they're like, it's a debate show. And I was like, okay. And I go on the first time and, I'm doing whatever I can't remember what question they asked me, but I didn't provide a take. And they were like, this is called First Take, And then the second or third show, I think me and Stephen A had our first viral moment. And I was like, I get it. I get what the show is now. But I couldn't tell you 5 horrible Stephen A takes between 2006 and 2021 when I retired. I couldn't tell you 5 because I didn't pay attention. I didn't know.
You mentioned how you're busier now than you were when you were playing. You set up your own production company. You have these viral videos. You're on First Take. Are you a media executive? Or are you media talent? Like, how do you view what you're doing?
Yeah, I think on the ESPN side, I certainly view it as being a talent. That's, and not to say I'm talented. I'm saying that's what we're called. We are the talent. If you're on camera, you're the talent, right? It's that simple. So I view it as I'm talent on the ESPN side. On the podcast side, I don't necessarily view it as being an executive. I view our team. So we have 5 people in our company right now. We're getting ready to bring on a 6th and 7th person. I view us as a team, and I view that side of my media life as ownership. That's something that I own. That's something that I've built myself. So I take a lot of pride in that, and I view it through that lens, not through the lens of being a boss or being the sole decision maker of something. We all have great sort of chemistry and different viewpoints on what we should and shouldn't do. My general viewpoint on the production company is to sort of move slow. I don't want to make 10 to 15 things a year. I want to make 2 to 3 great things a year. And so now that I'm retired, we have been able to sort of build momentum to making and producing other content outside of the podcast, which, we're really excited about.
What is the goal with 342 Productions? Like, what you said go slow, but where do you see it in 5-10 years? What are you trying to accomplish?
I think the general basis is sports storytelling, and not just my own storytelling. It's giving people platforms to storytell. There's something interesting we're going to have coming up is with a player who already makes his own content, and we're going to start co-producing some things with them. And I love video as much as I love podcasts and the audio side. I love video. So there are at least 2 right now television shows that we are actively working on. So that's sort of where I see it going. The podcast is sort of the tent pole, if you will, and then everything else we do outside of that. It could be athlete-driven content. It could be a scripted or unscripted show with a streamer. That's sort of where I see this going.
All right, they'll take me back to Duke. You're 18 to 22 years old, when you're at Duke, and there's so much focus on you. And some of it, was cocky, whatever the thing is with like the Duke player that you got, Leitner got and others have gotten. What is that like though? It's media, somewhat driven, fan driven. What was that like for you as, basically a kid, a young adult? What was that like for you dealing with that?
It was confusing. Luckily, I had a great support system. Coach K, Coach Collins, Coach Wojo, Coach Dawkins. I saw 2 different mental health professionals. The summer really after my sophomore to junior year was a life-changing period of time in my life. Continue to see a therapist throughout my time at Duke. But I never viewed it as the media creating something. I never viewed any of that. I never viewed the media in a negative way when I played. I always looked at it as the media has a job to do. You may not like the job they're doing, but that's their job. If I have a rough stretch and a Philly blogger wants to write a negative article about me, it's his prerogative to do that. He should do that. That's his job. His job is to tell the story of why I suck right now, right? The Duke white villain, like I've talked about. I talked about this on my early iteration of the Yahoo podcast. Some of that I think is a little media driven. I remember even when I was there and Greg Paulus was coming in, I remember reading articles and it was Greg Paulus will be the next hated Duke player. And I'm like, well, what do him and I have? He's a guard. He's white. He's annoying. Like, yeah, okay. This is like, there's some commonality there. But that the Duke hatred was somewhat self-driven because I was a jerk. And then some of that was just college basketball and the animosity and hatred for Duke. I didn't feel like it was because I was special that people hated me. It was like I went to Duke. Had I gone to the University of Florida, I don't think it would have been a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, John, we should tell him. I was on Coach K's pod the other day. I mean, John's a Maryland guy, so
JJ, I was not part of the crowd, but I was in the crowd that was chanting "F-U JJ," which in a strange way was almost like.
Hold on a second, John. Did you actually chant that?
No, I was too old to chant that. I did not chant that.
All right, because I was going to say you owe an apology.
But I will tell you this. From my seats, I thought the way that JJ Redick handled it, which was like a big smile on his face, it was almost like a love letter of sorts, is a way that Maryland was looking at it. In a certain sense.
I know you just or you just bleeped out your own F bomb, but are we allowed to say the F word on this? Or
you can say it, John. It's fine. No,
John? My line has always been, and I'm sorry, John, but my line has always been that when people ask about the hatred that I got at Duke, I have zero issue with any opposing fan bases. I love Carolina fans, sincerely. It was like such a pleasure to be part of that rivalry. There were some incidences at Wake or at Florida State, but like I have no ill will towards any fan bases except fuck Maryland.
Yes, JJ Redick.
Who invited JJ Redick on this damn podcast, Andrew Marchand?
JJ Redick, you might be making them. Well, wait, why? I like that. Why? Just because they did the FU, they were the only ones who did that.
No, Maryland was particularly vicious, and some of the signs. In fact, there was a big after the FUJJ chant. They took away Rock and Roll Part 1, which was a song that the band played that got the Maryland fans to chant "You suck," and the law of the land came down on Maryland somewhat. I would say, but
they were worse than anybody else.
There were a lot of unfair signs directed.
There was perpetual line crossing, I think is what it comes down to, perpetual line crossing. Also, like, it wasn't just at the arena. You have to understand there was personal harassment in my life. Like they would somehow get my number and they would call me 20 times between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. This is before you could silence your phone and have your alarm on, right? So you either had to have your, it was just stuff like that. It was yeah. I don't know if you remember this, but the attorney, after that game when they chanted my name, the Attorney General of Maryland got involved and did this whole study and sort of resolution on fan behavior at the University of Maryland. It was very interesting.
John and JJ, I want to lighten the mood a little bit. Did you still have those numbers? Because was one of them 2022? I'm giving you John's number. Were you, John? Admit it, John. Were you calling JJ at 2?
No, I was too old, and when I went to school in the Bob Wade era. We weren't good enough to compete. So
did you say F you to anybody though chanting?
Oh heck no, absolutely not. But
I'm not a fan. And look, we're gonna wrap up in a second, but I'm not really a fan of fans booing, especially their own players. Now the other players fine, but I don't think fans booing might be okay. But I'm not a fan of fans being able to say whatever the heck they want. I don't buy I bought a ticket, I can say whatever I want, because I don't think people would go up to anybody and say that to, most people wouldn't. Maybe some crazy people might.
JJ, from the crowd, it seemed like you weren't bothered by the FUJJ chant. No?
It's not in the moment. I embraced it. I put on my villain cap and
You beat the hell out of us that game.
my sister, one of my older sisters, she sums it up best. She's like, they thought you were an asshole, and you said, okay, I'll be an asshole.
That's what John. That's how it works with John and me too. I'm not gonna say who's the a-hole or not, but
I'm the nice guy of the pod, Andrew. You know that. Oh, come on.
Listen, you come from a school, it's garbage, Maryland. Ithaca, we didn't do that.
In America, we're like in this little bubble of fan behavior, because it is a topic of conversation, especially the last few years, where some things have been said, even at NBA arenas, that are particularly racist, and fans get kicked out or banned or whatever. When you look at fan behavior in the rest of the world, the USA is soft. Like fan behavior, like there's riots, there's fighting, there's people die.
Hooligans are a real thing. Exactly.
It's an aberration. There's 3 to 4 instances every year when you think about the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of paying customers, game after game after game after game, sport after sport after sport in America. And what do we say? There's 3 to 4 incidences a year. It's not that bad.
So JJ, I have one final question for you, and it goes back to Duke and the Coach K practices. Like, how many practices did he devote teaching you how to touch the floor? Like, was that like a full practice where they did that, or
this is the Maryland bias coming?
F you, John Ourand. Get it out of your system.
It's sort of like how very early human cultures passed along their stories and cultures through the spoken word. And we sort of did that through a visual medium at Duke, because we all grew up watching Duke. And I don't know who the first floor slapper was, but I grew up watching Wojo.
Wojo, there's another one.
Never said you got to slap the floor on this possession, or here's when you slap the floor. You just slapped the floor when you felt it. When you felt it, when you wanted to be intense, when you needed a stop, that was the time to do it. Here we go.
I'm going to start slapping my desk when we're having one of our debates, John, just to get you going, just to throw you off. All right. Listen, JJ, I would go through your resume again in closing, but this pod, we try to keep it to under an hour. And so we're not, but you're doing great. Media Empire. Congratulations on that. And is there anything you want to say? Final words to John.
John, my only thing is I'm so disappointed in the University of Maryland for taking the bag and leaving the ACC. It just shows such a lack of integrity. All right. See you guys.
Thanks. That's it. Thanks, JJ.
I got to take that. JJ, excellent podcast. Please listen to it. Thank you very much for joining us. This was fun.
Appreciate it.
I got to say, that was great. I love that. He still has the passion. The Maryland fans still get that passion out of him. But I will say this, and he talked about it too, the arc of his career. And I think that even when he came through in the NBA and played in DC, the Wizards really don't have a rabid fan base, but he got booed every time he came through DC. It's sort of a Maryland residue there until sort of like midway toward the end of his career. And now like he's almost turned his, like, I'm not sure if it's an age that happened or if it's maturity on his part, or if it's just kind of people just respecting somebody that had a nice, good, long career, who's really a likable guy.
Yeah, and I think for me, from a media perspective, what impresses me, and you hear it, and you can tell by how he's gone about, the podcast, the First Take thing, and even how he recognizes the value of First Take, wanting to do games. Sometimes there's people, ex-players, not really ex-players, it's people in general. And I don't really want to say just ex-players, but people in general, sometimes, I don't know, you get them on here and they're doing well in sports media, but they don't really get the business, at least, initially. He gets the business. He might not, this might be a little bit faster than he thought, and he's doing really well. It's been very lucrative for him, but he understands the business. I would not be betting against his production company. I think even going slow, to me, that makes sense. He doesn't sound like he made a lot of money as a player, so he doesn't like need the money. A lot of people are making these quick businesses and then trying to sell them. And, going slow to me, if you really want to successful, if you're really trying to tell stories, I think slower is better. And I think a lot of times people kind of ratchet it up so then they can try to sell it quick. And I don't think he's doing that. I mean, he might be able to get a nice valuation one day, but that doesn't seem like that's necessarily the goal. That could be part of the journey, but it's not necessarily the goal. And so that's what impressed me in terms of how thoughtful he was. And you can tell because he's a Dookie and not a Maryland guy.
Yeah, you know what? You could even like take a look. I'll ignore that comment, Andrew, but take a look at how he described the podcast, and he didn't just say like I'm just going to sit down at this podcast and talk to my friends and throughout. Like he's looking for holes or areas that he can sort of fill with his podcast, and he's thinking already about sort of how the podcast will mature. And he's a very thoughtful guy, and he has it really is a fantastic podcast that if you're an NBA fan, people really, really like that.
That was enjoyable. All right, let's move to our call of the week.
Call of the week.
All right, John, for this week, we're doing something different for our call of the week. It's somber. Grant Wahl passed away last week. Shocking news out of the World Cup. I'm sure basically everyone listening has heard what happened with Wahl. He was covering the quarterfinals game between Argentina and the Netherlands and collapsed and then passed away in Qatar. There's a lot of things that swirled around this, but for us, let's just stick to what we know about the situation. And the big thing is, to me, is how he's been eulogized. I think it's been touching. Not to me, because this is to me like when I talk about anything, he had a obviously influential career. You could argue the preeminent soccer writer of this generation. It also did college hoops, actually did a feature on JJ Redick at one point, and of course did the LeBron high school cover story for Sports Illustrated that introduced LeBron to the nation. But it really, to me, what stood out is how he was to people and how helpful he was and kind he was. And to me, that's the true, test of someone and who they are. And so to me, that's the greatest tribute to someone, is how he treated other people and how he was there for people, it seemed like, who could help him in the business and people who couldn't help him at all in the business and outside of the business. And so for that, I just want to pass on my condolences to Grant Wahl's family and friends. There's a really tough and shocking death on Friday when that news spread.
Yeah, it was a total gut punch. I didn't know him very well, but I knew him well enough that it really affected me when I heard it. And one of the things that stuck out to me, in addition to what you said, is just the amount of people that he touched. It was so many tweets that I saw, so many social media posts from so many different people from all walks of life. There are so many personal stories about meeting somebody who took the time to just connect with them, and that's quite a legacy. I have a personal story too. The first time I met Grant Wahl, I of course knew exactly who Grant Wahl was. He was a famous Sports Illustrated writer. He was coming to David Beckham's first game in Washington D.C. with MLS, and we sat in the press box. I was introduced to him, and we sat down for a half hour and just chatted about soccer, about sports media, and price of tea in China. It didn't matter. It was like every time I saw him, it was similar to that. So it's our condolences to his family, his friends, and to everybody. And with that, let's thanks to our producers, Chris Mason, AC Wyatt, and let's call this one to a close.